David Fernandez from SPRI, the Basque Agency for Business Development.
Good morning, and thank you for your invitation to be here. After my first visit in 2018, we were partners of InvestNI in a European project. Well, I read once that, according to Ronald Reagan, the 9 most terrifying words in the English language were, "I am from the government and I am here to help." So, how will I explain that I am from the government and we support cluster organizations? Well, cluster policy started in the 1990s in the Basque Country, following the works of Professor Porter, and in a particular situation in our industry with obsolescence of some sectors, unemployment rate reaching 30% in certain districts. So it was in the framework of policy making, industrial policy making in the Basque Country. And it started first with a mapping of our economic reality to identify which were our clusters. As it has been said before, there is this concept of the natural clusters, the assets you have in your region in terms of technology, industries, knowledge, and skills. After this mapping, a constructive dialogue started between the government and the private sector. And this gave birth to the first cluster organizations. In some cases, they were constructed upon existing organizations. It is the case, for instance, of AFM that Xavier has exposed. But in other clusters, we identified a cluster such as the automotive, but there was no existing organization at the time. So the cluster organization was created from scratch. And the format of cluster organization in the Basque Country is private non-profit associations created by the private sector with support from us. We helped, but created by the private sector. We usually have this dilemma of top-down and bottom-up. Well, I think since we talk about cluster policy, the government has a role to play in the activation, in this dialogue with the private sector, but it has to be driven by the private sector later. We have these basic concepts known to all of us, the triple helix, open innovation, public-private partnership. Of course, when I mean triple is, let's say, the basics. We should rather talk about maybe quadruple with the civil society or the entrepreneurs, the capital as the Pentagon model by Christian Hansen and his team. But anyway, this is the idea of multi-stakeholder initiative, far from the traditional trade associations. For us, cluster management organizations are more than just someone who is a beneficiary for a subsidy. They are allies for the government in the deployment, first in the design and then in the deployment of our strategies and plans. So it's an agent, I don't like that much the word a tool, but an agent in the deployment of other policies. This is just some documents, government strategy documents, too much writing from the government, as you can see. But these are strategies and plans from different departments in the government that take into account or assign a role to cluster organizations. Just an example, anecdotically, in the 129 pages of the Basque Industrial Development and Internationalization Plan, which is, let's say, the master strategy document of our department, which is Economic Development Department, the word cluster organizations, the expression appears 34 times. So, and it is assigned a role of lever for collaboration to get growth and diversification of our economy. But they are also mentioned, and they are assigned a role in papers related with Agenda 2030, with different circular economy papers and digitalization of the economy and so on. Well, this is our cluster organizations. All in all, we have 16 cluster organizations, and they gather around 2,500 members, paying a membership fee and actively engaged in the cluster organizations. Out of them, around 200 belong to the Science, Technology and Innovation System, and also to other bodies like different administrative bodies from the government and different associations. STI, I include also the academy, but not only universities. The vocational training system has a very important role. They are, even in some class organizations, a vocational training school sits on the board of the cluster. Well, sorry, I did not go in detail, but these are the sectors. The largest, just maybe in numbers, are energy, ICT, advanced manufacturing, but there are some other smaller but very active and dynamic in their sector, even if eventually the membership and the sector is not that large as with the previous ones. We are currently developing or helping to develop, to activate an initiative in the financial and investment services. In fact, we have been interacting with the private sector for around 6 to 9 months, and then they have constituted an association. And now we are, in a dialogue with them to help put in place and increase the base. They have, after this, let's say 1 year, they have 50 members, paying already a membership fee of 3,000 euros, and their goal is to reach 100 members in 1 more year. Well, the support program, here is the helping issue. We have a funding program that co-funds the activities of the cluster. It's 3.8 million, but we also have this non-funding support or kind of capacity building. We also try to engage all of the cluster associations in these peer-to-peer exchanges and learning from each other, some clustering. They are naturally working in many initiatives, for instance, related to the green transition with the environmental clusters, or in decarbonization issues, working some of the clusters, initially those with higher emissions, but they are engaged in other class organizations. And we try to nurture this, let's say, cluster ecosystem, like engaging all of them in different activities. We have working groups with them to address different common interests or challenges, like, for instance, SDGs or technology roadmaps and issues related, as I mentioned, to decarbonization and so on. Well, just one concept that has also appeared and that is present also in our cluster policy is that of delivering impact. And for that, we need a certain critical mass. We have requirements in the support program. One of them is that the turnover of the total membership should represent more than 1% of the Basque Country GDP, which currently is around 800 million euros. We are aware that the turnover maybe is not the best metrics. We should rely on other like added value, but just for agility and the easiness to access, we use this figure. They need to have also at least 60% of SMEs in the membership. They have large organizations, of course, and they have this concept of, rather than value chain, I would say related value chains. So, for instance, in other regions, they have more like niche clusters or clusters focused on, let's say, renewable wind energy or solar energy cluster. Our model is more like energy cluster. We have one, and within it, there are several different related value chains represented. Smart grids, offshore wind, eventually solar, and they work on different committees, on different working groups, some common challenges they address together, but then some specific market needs or technology trends or whatever they treat on this value chain approach. Well, they work basically on collaborative business intelligence, R&D plus innovation, ideation of projects and configuration of partnerships to carry out the projects, internationalization, talent development, which is a growing issue because we felt this scarcity of talent and we have several challenges like making, in particular, I would say manufacturing more sexy to the younger generations, also incorporating the female talent in some specific activities and mainly industrial classes, let's say. We also work on sustainability, let's say the twin transitions, the green transition and the digital transition as well. And they also have a role to play in the acceleration of startups through different initiatives. Some of the cluster organizations have created specific initiatives to incorporate the technology of startups to the sector. In some of the cases, they have created like business angel networks for addressing the companies in the field of activity of the cluster and so on. And this is basically the activity they address in our cluster organizations. Well, this is just a little bit about the profile. Basically, the governance is based on a general assembly and then a board of directors. The board of directors typically is chaired by a president, always from the private sector, and then the membership of the board of directors is like 12 to 18 members, more or less, depending also on the size of the organization. Mostly businesses, private businesses, but also with seats for the science, technology, and innovation and the academy system. And the government is represented. In fact, we have a figure within the government, within ESPRI, the agency, that we called Cluster Liaison Officer. And this is kind of the representative of this helix blade into the governance, but we are not formally members of the board of directors. We have this concept from the beginning of having voice but no vote. We don't want to interfere, but we want to listen and to be listened to. And on top of that specific, let's say, link, there is a relation through with different government departments for the different fields of activity of the cluster. When it is talent, it can be the labor department or education department and so on. Well, regarding then the staff, normally there is around 4 people, and in the largest organizations is more than 20 offices. Normally a cluster manager, and then these project managers or people in area managers for the different activities that they carry out. They can have, for instance, one manager for internationalization, another one for R&D plus I, another one for talent issues, and so on. And the funding, well, the funding is basically private, but also with public funding. Normally it's around 65, in some cases even 70 or 70 plus something, private financing from membership fees and from services delivered by the class organization. Around 20% is the cluster program, our cluster program. Last year it was 18 point something, okay, of the budget of the cluster associations on average, okay. In some of them, let's say, most performant organizations, our cluster support program represents around 8.5 or 9%, something like this. Then the rest usually comes from competitive calls at national level or European level. This is basically the funding scheme. For the fees, normally they have a variable scale depending on the size of the member of the company. But I think it's 2 or 3 of the class organizations have like a fixed fee for any member, around 1,700 or something else, 2,500, something like that. We have done recently an analysis of the membership fee schedules, and we have shared with all of them because there is a large heterogeneity, and some of them wanted to know a little bit how others were doing. So we proposed for them to collect the information and then to process and share with them. So this is more or less, this would be, the red line is the median and the green one is the mean. So starting in these levels, the minimum would be around 560 euros and the maximum around 14,000. But we have some organization, well, this is kind of a simulation we have done for like a given figure of members, okay? Because there is quite heterogeneous. In some other clusters, these figures are slightly higher. Even some of them have like sponsorship relation or something with quantities near 30,000 euros. But this is basically the membership fee schedule. Well, these are some initiatives and the contribution they do to different initiatives that we share with them. Regarding SDGs or regarding digital issues, this is one acceleration of a startups initiative where the clusters have been working to provide the challenges with their companies so that the startups can engage into the challenges. And, well, different initiatives, as I mentioned before. We have had some collaborations as well in FDI attraction to identify gaps in the local value chain that we should proactively search abroad, companies that we should tackle. So together with the cluster organizations, we have done this work with our Invest in the Basque Country service. And this is basically what we do with them, the contribution they do to different initiatives. Well, some lessons learned. First, it's not mentioned here, but this is the question of mapping. Who defines who is a cluster? We have found in some regions that even they were aware themselves that some of the cluster initiatives were self-defined cluster or self-described cluster initiatives. But there needs to be this dialogue from our point of view in the government to really see the best way to impact in the industrial or in the economy tissue. Because, for instance, figures on the potential numbers that should be reached after a period, and this kind of topics must be into the discussion. Related the geography or the spatial boundaries, well, usually it's said that the boundaries of the cluster are not the administrative boundaries of regions or countries. So in our case, the program requires that the coverage of the cluster organization is at least the region of the Basque Country, not municipal, not districts, or not sub-regional, but the whole region. this has to be translated, okay? Because regions are not the same, maybe in our geography, in continental countries like, I don't know, Brazil, or in any other country. So it has to be adapted. But you have to kind of think on an optimal and suboptimal geographical range of the cluster. In fact, some of the clusters in the Basque Country are, like the case of AFM, they are concentrated, most of the members are concentrated because of this natural cluster. They are concentrated in the Basque Country, but they are open, and in fact, they have members from all of Spain. We have other clusters that have, again, this concentration, local concentration, but they have members in other neighboring regions of Spain or even cross-border in the Aquitaine region of France. Also, another issue to tackle is the technology or the industry scope of the cluster, how we define it. Our model is, as I said, maybe a little bit general, like energy or food cluster. I don't know whether this is the best, but we have found in some countries that or regions, they say, we're going to put in place the Apple cluster. And we say, do you think this is the optimal, the scope? Shouldn't it be maybe like the fruit cluster or the agrotech cluster, the sustainable food cluster? But this is something that you have to think from the beginning, because otherwise, as you grow up and eventually see the ratio of the collaboration relationships, it might be that it doesn't fit the reality you want to address. Well, the question of critical mass, we have talked about this. Then it's very important, the appropriation by the private sector. We can be facilitators, we can help, as Mr. Regan said, but it should be driven by the industry. And I say the industry in particular, or the companies, because at least in our experience, the science and technology ecosystem, the academia, of course, have a supporting role. But cluster initiatives should be driven by the market and also have this traded approach to the market in terms of global or international markets. That's why, in our experience, it's the private sector, the companies that should drive the initiative. Regarding closed cluster, it's very important because, as it has been said before, companies face challenges that cannot be addressed individually and even not in the framework of the cluster organization. So it's very important also to search and to look for these relations with other cluster initiatives. This idea of entrepreneurial CMOs, cluster management organizations, open to explore the boundaries of the cluster, to be alert for the possibilities of collaboration with other stakeholders, to grow. So in a way, I was talking to Xavier yesterday, a cluster manager is kind of leading, but he's also managing. And it's like the very organization is in itself a small SME that has to look after the figures and the financial sustainability. And they have a team, because normally you do not have a cluster organization with just one person. You can start, but as you start putting in place the initiatives and the plans, you will need a team. So it's more of a team. And finally, to have, in particular from the public sector, but also from the private sector, these long-term views. Companies have to put a bit of generosity, because they won't see results in the very short term. So they have to be ready to share, to put some resources, and to trust. And trust has appeared before in this conversation. Well, this is all that I had to share with you. Thank you very much, and I will be more than pleased to listen to your questions. Thank you.